Just in this part of the world, in many parts of the world, whether it's hunger, of course, climate change, supply chains. So we're going to discuss food systems and where they go next. And joining us for this conversation will be Serene Farah, who is the Vice President of Growth at Pure Harvest. And that's a company that creates hydroponic farms in Kuwait, the UAE, and here in Saudi Arabia, where they are turning deserts into greenhouses. And she'll be joined by Manna Tree co-founder and managing partner, Ellie Rubenstein. Manna Tree invests in companies that produce scalable, healthy food, and they will be interviewed by senior writer at Fortune, creator of the list that you heard about this morning, Emma Hinchliffe. Enjoy. Thank you.
Hi, Serene. Hi, Ellie. Thank you so much for being here.
Hey, Emma.
Well, we're super excited to talk about food, something that, of course, affects all of us.
We're scratching.
Serene, could you just kind of set the lay of the land for us? What is the state of food supply and food resilience in the Middle East today?
Sure. Generally speaking, food security, especially in this region, has always been a very strategic issue. All the constraints that this part of the world needs to deal with, from climate severity to geopolitical risk, et cetera, makes it kind of a net importer of food. And it becomes really, really essential, really important to think about how to build resilient food systems. So how to withstand climate shocks, how to withstand geopolitical shocks, supply chain shocks. So what's great about this part of the world is that, especially in the GCC, it's not that the governments have acknowledged that and have taken it a step further. They're actually really investing behind how to create high-quality, resilient food systems in country.
Okay, so they know it's an issue, so they're really investing in it.
Absolutely, yeah.
As opposed to other places. Got it. Ellie, you've been working and traveling to this region and to this country for a long time, much earlier than many of your peers in the US. Especially in the context of food. What have you seen change in that time?
Yeah, so I've been coming here since Manna Tree started, and we started 7 years ago. And as a woman, I actually came here by myself. And so I've actually been honored to see the transformative changes that have happened in the kingdom. It's incredible. When I first came here, we were labeled as a food security fund. And that was not necessarily a word in the US that came first of mind when you think of a healthy food fund, but it was something that I understood. I had predominantly grown up in Alaska, where we import 95% of our food. That is the only state to do that. So I understood that there was not a need to educate what it means to have healthy food here, because there was definitely a willingness to pay and a want to have healthy food in this region. I think the other thing that I would say that I've seen is that if you flash forward 7 years now, we tend to be labeled more of a health and wellness firm than a food security firm. And you may ask, well, how did that change? And I think there is an awareness here, especially what we see in the US, similar to Saudi, which is women are driving these purchasing behaviors, and they don't just want food. They want food that's better for you, better for the environment, and better for their health. And the same purchasing behaviors in the US that are driving the US, because today the US is the #1 health and wellness economy globally. It's a $2 trillion economy. I will also say that a third of global health and wellness spending is spent in the US, but Saudi today is top 30, and there's really interesting behaviors being driven by women that are really moved it forward in ways that I wouldn't have thought would have happened this fast.
Yeah, that's fascinating, and we should dive into a lot of that. But first, obviously, your firm, Manna Tree, food is one piece of that, health and wellness more broadly. What role does food play in the health and wellness ecosystem? How are the two related, and where do they kind of diverge into separate categories? Or do they?
It's a great question. I mean, we always try to explain to people that we are food supply chain investors first. And all that really means is you take a raw commodity, like an animal protein or a grain, and then you have transparency and a rigorous understanding of that supply chain, and then you have a brand. And the brand is what those of us tend to love that we purchase because we think it matches our values. And so what we see is that the brands that are wanted here, there's less of an emphasis on the commodities, maybe from a food security standpoint, but the rise of the technological innovations that all of us are buying now, whether it's TikTok or Instagram, you can reach these brands from a click away. And I think that has really transformed you, not just how can you get products faster, better, and cheaper, but things that match your purchasing values are available. And I think that in here specifically, what I've seen is a very interesting demographic base. And so let me backtrack for a second. I have a double master's in Purdue from agriculture economics. And why do I emphasize that? That really is a global supply chain degree. That degree really was why Manatree started, but what it really means is you have to understand who your consumer is. And the consumer in Saudi today, I believe, is the consumer of the future tomorrow. And so when you look at these demographics, it's really stunning. As you guys know, sitting here, 63% of this population is under 30. And so when we talk in the US a lot about how Gen Z is changing buying behaviors, you guys are already changing it. The other thing that's really interesting to me is that 46% of the buying behaviors today are online. That didn't exist when I came here 7 years ago. And the other things that I've seen that are just subtle nuances is when I used to come, everything was dinner in the homes, which I really did appreciate and felt valued for. But now it's turned into, let's go out to these restaurants. Look at the restaurants that are here. And there's a vibrancy and changing of, do you eat at home or do you eat outside of the home? So I think little nuances. So when we talk about health and wellness in the US, it's predominantly food. Let me be clear. 90% of food purchases in the US are made by women. 85% of the willingness to pay comes from, will it make me healthy or happy? And 80% of healthcare decisions in the US are made by women. In Saudi, it's different. The number one thing people buy in Saudi is makeup. The rise of influencers and makeup and fashion and beauty and making somebody feel good is still here. That is the number one in Saudi. But what's interesting is right behind it. Fitness, athleisure, wellness. And you're seeing that in things of how you live, work, and play. So a lot of the leisure and hospitality. So it may be different and it's subtle, but the women are still the ones that are doing the buying behavior.
Yeah, lots of consumer trends to dive into. But of course, on the food side, Serene, of course, what you're doing at Pure Harvest really is hopefully enabling a lot of this. But just so everyone understands, can you tell us a little bit about what Pure Harvest does and what your technology is?
Absolutely. So yes, we can focus on controlled environment agriculture. In terms of what that means, it's kind of like the concept of taking outdoor farming or farming in the field and bringing it into the realm of engineering, where you can really control the environment. So it could be anything from a greenhouse to a glass house to a really enclosed space where you control the environmental factors like temperature, humidity, in certain instances, light levels, and other factors in order to be able to grow. So in our case at Pure Harvest, we can grow anywhere and any time of the year. So we can produce really high quality tomatoes, blackberries, strawberries, leafy greens in the middle of the desert in Saudi or in the middle of the desert in the UAE. And you're getting that day after day, consistent quality. So that's kind of like the system. And why that's important is exactly what we discussed a little bit earlier. This is not a very this is not a very food resilient region. We really need to think of, climate adaptive technologies that allow us to work with what we have. So to reimagine how we grow food. So we've been able to grow food indoors at an economic level and to produce a quality that's really delighting customers and consumers.
So what lessons does that work show us for what the rest of the world can expect as climate change continues? What can we learn from the Middle East?
Yeah, so given all of these constraints and particularly, so UAE and KSA basically are some of the harshest climates to grow fresh produce in. And what we can make work here at an economic level can work anywhere. So it's kind of like almost like the test bed, and then you can take it and sort of down tech and invest a little bit less for other climate vulnerable regions or water scarce regions. And unfortunately, given how climate change is expected to change climates in different parts of the world, I think there'll be a lot of lessons learned. We would have taken the arrows and hopefully transferred some of those learnings of how to kind of produce economically in other parts of the world as well.
Ellie mentioned Alaska, for example. Can this work in environments on the totally other side of the spectrum?
It absolutely can, with different types of, so you focus more on heating rather than cooling, which is what we do here. So here we need to invest in mechanical cooling in the heat of the desert and dehumidification. In those other types of climates, you need to focus more on heating, supplemental lighting, so you find kind of more enclosed spaces with LED lighting, which again, you can produce consistently in really high quality products even in places like Alaska. Yeah.
You know, one of the things that I love coming here for, and frankly, it's really an honor to see so many women in the room. Usually here, there's very few women in the room, but every time I come, there's a part of PIF that many people may not know. It's called SOLIC. And believe it or not, they're wholly owned by PIF, but it's actually now one of the largest owners of commodities globally. I believe they're about 7 billion of AUM. They started at the same time I started Manatry. And why do I bring this up? Because I've seen that in about 7 years, the Saudi food security statistic, just from SOLIC alone, has been able to go from we import 95% of our food to I believe it's down to about 83%. And that's stunning. And how did they do that? Well, they really went and essentially bought and partnered with some of the leading beef and grain companies. But what I respect more about it, that I haven't seen other places that tend to suffer from food insecurity, is they take the knowledge. So they are using the powers of dollars to go and invest. But then they take that knowledge and they bring it home. And you really now see a convergence of, okay, we've made these international investments, but how do we increase local production or get companies like, you know, what you see with Pure Harvest to scale? That is interesting in the sense of we see it now in what I would call health and wellness, in the sense of if they've already made so many tech investments, which is predominantly what a lot of Saudi and PIF has done, it's great to see that they're now saying, okay, in some ways, tech may be a consumer investment. You talk about TikTok. So where can we now take the learnings of tech and invest in consumer? And I think that that in and of itself differentiates Saudi from the other parts of the GCC. I've never seen somebody move that food statistic that fast. And other things you may not understand. Saudi may be only 30 million people, which is about 10 times the population of UAE. So it is bigger, but they really feel like they need to feed Africa. And that can be upwards of 500 million people. So this is really important. It's not just Saudi is food insecure. They really take this, you know, pride in how can we feed our neighbor. And in the US, I don't see that. And I think that spending time here, you always want to then come home and say, wow, you know, the GCC is this positive place. And they actually use their dollars to transform these statistics relatively fast. So I think it's really interesting. They can take things like, here's the harshest climate, we're going to solve it, we will grow greens, right? And I think that that's a lesson all of us can take home in our own respective industries.
Thank you for that, Ellie. If anyone has any questions, please start thinking. So we'll have the opportunity to ask in a moment. But I do want to look for Asrar Damdam, who I believe is in the room. Right there. Could we get a mic over to her, please? Asrar is the founder and CEO of Uvera and is also an expert on this topic. I would love to hear from you about food waste. How do you think innovation can help us solve and prevent food waste?
Thank you, Emma, for the question. Serene, Eli, it's a great honor to meet you here in Riyadh today. My name is Asrar Damdam. I'm the founder and CEO of Uvera. Uvera is a startup company that focuses on compacting food waste here in the kingdom. So what we do at Uvera is sterilizing fresh produce. Here in the kingdom, we import more than 80% of our food needs. And because of the harsh weather, we have huge amount of food spoilage, especially in the fresh produce. So what we developed is a technology that can double the shelf life of fresh foods without any chemicals and within only 30 seconds of treatment. And by combining that with an IoT-based traceability, we can also track the inventory and see the food along the supply chain. So this is our way of combating food waste here in the kingdom, but there are lots of other companies that are focusing on the same goal, using composting and other technologies as well.
Amazing. Thank you so much for that, Asrar. Do we have any other questions for Ellie and Serene? No? Okay, we're good. Well, let's keep talking about tech. Serene, what can AI contribute to all of this? How has incorporating that technology improved outcomes at Pure Harvest, or how do you expect it might in the future?
Yeah, sure. So there's different ways in which data and AI can help improve growing and food systems overall. So one example is precision in climate control and irrigation. So you're able to use a lot less inputs to create a lot more output. So precision irrigation allows you to use around 90% less water in a pure harvest system, for example, than you would in an open field. A lot less, a lot less fertilizer, a lot less nutrition, because you're really precisely controlling what goes in. And you're really achieving 7 to 10x the yields you would achieve in an outdoor, in even a low-tech facility. So we produce around 100 kilos per square meter of tomatoes versus an average of 12. So that's one area. Another area is yield forecasting. So this is quite applicable, actually, even more so for open field farmers, whereby they're able to use, to understand how climate may impact yield in the next week, 2 weeks, month. And that allows them to plan, for example, their labor needs, again, inputs, et cetera, and reduce a lot wastage and efficiency, especially in an industry where the margins are really quite thin. In areas where labor is quite expensive, so particularly in the West, you see, especially this year, a lot more investment in robotics. So you find literally little robots roaming around farms that have been trained to understand this is what a ripe fruit looks like, and they harvest it. So many different applications for AI going forward.
Ellie, you mentioned the importance of brand, and that's kind of what the consumer sees. Obviously, a lot of global brands have come into the Saudi market. What mistakes do you see global brands making when they bring their food and their food brands here?
Yeah, it's a relevant question. I think I've also seen some mistakes, as you have. You've been here about a decade. I've seen people come in and think what works in their country will work here. There's no doubt that international brands have their purchasing power, but I think specific to when women are the purchasing driver, you need to be able to speak to usually 3 themes: women's empowerment, the circularity economy that you mentioned, that seems to be more something that women really care about, and health and wellness. And those 3 things are really relevant. But I also want to take a step back and point out something different. What's been the most interesting to me since I've been here, and we have, I should say, 14% of our LP base is families that are in the region, and predominantly women, to be very honest. I have seen that in that time, some of those women have become startup founders. And a third of startup founders today, no different than yourself, are women. And why do I mention this? I think that when women have a seat at the table, what they want to see when brands come into the region is very different. In the time that I've been here, in 7 years, I've seen that the senior management levels in Saudi today of women are a little under 50%. And that's almost doubled in 7 years. And as an American today, I'm not proud that our country doesn't actually think that women should be part of the economic integration, especially when women are the ones moving GDPs of their countries. And so I mentioned our Saudi female investors. They are a very important part to me, but the most interesting to me is of total AUM of our firm, they're actually only 6%. But they feel like they have been democratizing their countries, trying to make sure that brands come in so that Saudi women have the brands that they want to come here. And it's really important because 2/3 of our team today is women. And I wouldn't have started our firm if I could have found a firm to invest in or a firm that I felt like matched my values. And as a 37-year-old woman who is not married, I didn't understand why consumer firms, predominantly in the US, are men. They don't understand how women feel and how they want to spend their share of their wallet. And more importantly, back to the women founders, women want to make their own money and then put it back into the economy that they feel like is the community that represents them. So what would I say? There is definitely a Saudi-first mentality here, as there should be, because the women here are democratizing their countries. They're not just democratizing their families. And that's really, really important. And so for us, it's a very important demographic that we focus on because you guys are shattering barriers that the rest of the world should pay attention to.
Yeah, thank you, Ellie. Serene, what are the ultimate goals of Pure Harvest and your broader industry? What share of food would you and obviously the company like to see grown in these structures as opposed to imported?
So generally speaking, what we grow in indoor spaces is vine crops. It's really difficult to, for example, grow trees. But really what we're trying to achieve is, like, the mission is how can we build more resiliency? We're never going to get to 100%, of course, but how can we get the basics? How can we build resiliency in this part of the world? How can we get food closer to consumers? So, Asra, you alluded to shelf life, because we import a very, very large percentage of our food from different countries. So 80% in KSA, more than 90% in the UAE, you find that reduces shelf life significantly. So you'll find a strawberry goes bad within 2-3 days of purchasing it, or even less. So what we, for example, at Pure Harvest are able to do, what's harvested at night can be found at the store the next morning. So that really does delight consumers. You know, a tomato lasts much longer, it's fresher, it's more delicious. So it's creating this kind of resiliency, this consumer delight, this trust, extended shelf life, reducing carbon footprint, the ability to kind of grow in more sustainable ways. For example, like I mentioned, you can use a lot less water within a very, very water-stressed kind of region. You can co-locate farms in order to leverage excess waste. So if we co-locate some of our farms next to, for example, power stations or factories, we can use some of that excess heat to help reduce the energy burden of our cooling systems. So it's really the nexus of all of this. How can we produce food in a more sustainable way with positive unit economics that are profitable? Of course, profitability is part of sustainability, and delight the consumers with really high quality, fresh, delicious produce.
Amazing. Thank you so much to you both.
Thank you.